Hi, I'm Barry Penner, a former Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation for British Columbia, as well as a former Minister of Environment and Attorney General. Although you are joining us virtually, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from downtown Vancouver on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm speaking to you today as the Managing Director of the Vancouver International Arbitration Centre. We help solve disagreements between businesses, organizations, and people. Established in 1986, we have a unique role in legislation, but we are independent from government. We have more than 100 top-notch mediators and arbitrators on our roster to help you efficiently resolve disputes, whether they involve joint ventures in major projects, business partnerships, or shareholder agreements. With BC First Nations undertaking important economic development projects, such as forestry operations, retail, or high-density housing developments, for example, as a way of establishing economic independence, contracts and commercial agreements are the order of the day. Unfortunately, it's almost inevitable some conflicts will arise along the way. And when they do, all too often this means you can end up in court. That's usually the last place you want to be. But the good news is you can take steps to avoid it. It starts with your agreement. At the beginning, when the relationship is fine, the last thing anybody wants to talk about is what to do if there is a dispute. But that is the best time to think about it when everyone is still getting along, so that if matters do go off course later, there is a way to solve the disagreement without going to court. How? By inserting a clause in your business agreement that any unresolved dispute will be referred to mediation and/or arbitration rather than to court. We at the Vancouver International Arbitration Centre can provide you with some suggested wording to share with your legal advisors that then can be used in your contracts. This way, you can resolve your impasse as quickly as possible instead of letting it fester and drag along into the courts. And you can do it with as little expense as possible. In fact, it may help salvage the rest of your business relationship if the problematic matter can be isolated and put to bed quickly. To make this happen, it's advisable that while writing the contract or business agreement, the parties dedicate some time and planning to these important dispute resolution clauses so that the path for solving any potential problem is clear. Vancouver International Arbitration Centre has the expertise to play a major role in the process of conflict resolution. As mentioned, we have qualified mediators and adjudicators ready to begin the process of hearing the parties and finding a meaningful solution. Give us a call at 604-684-2821 or check out our website at www.vaniac.org. That's our acronym for the Vancouver International Arbitration Centre. And let's see how we can help. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the next panel, Partnerships and Equity Ownerships in Major Projects, moderated by Dallas Smith, President of the Nanwakolas Council. Dallas?
Thanks so much, Barry. It's been great to see you on the screen there on the message. It was a pleasure working with you both in your roles as the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Indigenous Relations. We did a lot of great stuff together. So I'd like to welcome everybody to our next panel today. Our next session is focused on partnerships and equity ownerships in major projects. It's my pleasure to introduce this morning's speakers. Pleased to have my good friend John Jack, Councillor from the Huu-ay-aht First Nation, and I believe Chair of the ACRD still? Yes, and Chair of the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. We have Trevor Gatzke, Business Development Manager in Reconciliation and Indigenous Partnerships at Grieg Seafoods. Welcome. Christy Smith, Vice President of Indigenous Engagement at Falkirk. Thank you. And my good friend Charlene, Chief Sharleen Gale from Fort Nelson First Nation. Thanks for coming. So it's been an interesting couple days, and we've talked about lots of great things that lead to projects and partnerships. And one of the things that we're seeing emerging now as Indigenous people start to take both hands on the wheel for self-determination is equity partnerships. I think that's something that, not by hook or crook that has been missing as we started developing partnerships throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. But now we're actually getting to the equity portion, which is so important to making sure that these projects benefit First Nations communities as opposed to benefiting from First Nations communities. And so I'm really pleased to have you guys all on today. And so what we'll do is we'll give each of you some time to make some opening comments and talk about a few things. And then we'll come back and have a bit of a group discussion. And I want to encourage our audience to go onto the Huu-ay-aht app and start loading up some questions that you may have for our panelists to discuss. So without further ado, over to you, John.
Okay, thank you for having me. My name is John Jack. I am coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Qualicum First Nation. I live in Oceanside. So I'm a councillor for the Huu-ay-aht First Nations, and we have a long history on the west coast of Vancouver Island, on the southern banks of Barkley Sound. And I don't need to go through the history of where we're at, but I think I would start by saying in the 90s, we started to understand that it wasn't just about winning court cases and individual decisions, leading to money and that sort of thing, because a lot of the court decisions ended up bringing us in the direction of negotiating with businesses, with government, and moving forward in that way. So we started to shift our thinking into negotiation, just skipping the middleman at that point. And through that process, we started creating relationships with businesses, mostly in forestry at the time. We got into negotiating a treaty and successfully ratified that. Part of that was negotiating for a First Nations woodlot license, where we have control over that. Relationships are what really matter here. And those relationships ended up hinging on our ability to not only understand what was going on in the global economy, but also understand who we are as a First Nation, bringing value to the table. And that value creation part is one of the most important things, because we're dealing with a global economy and something in which we know what we should know and should be able to demonstrate what we bring to the table in order to create value and share in that value. We're currently involved in an joint ownership of Tree Farm License 44 on Vancouver Island with Western Forest Products. We started with a very low percentage of ownership, but it was something that was seen as very important, not only from a business perspective for Huu-ay-aht, but also from a political perspective in having and returning to having influence over a larger share of the territory that we lost. When you compare our traditional territory to our current territory under treaty, it's not close, but it is better than how it was. And that's what we're always doing, is moving forward. In order to even get to that point, though, we had to go through a process of developing our unique understanding of our land and our resources, but also the economy as a whole, and what it took to be competitive in a global timber and lumber market, and what we could do as a First Nation to help create that value and share in it. Part of what we were dealing with and are constantly dealing with now, even under treaty, is the understanding that in order for First Nations to close gaps and create opportunity for our citizens that is approaching equal to the rest of the people in Canada and BC, we need to grow faster. When you need to catch up to someone, you actually need to run faster than they are at the moment. But it's not just how quickly Canada or BC is growing, it's also inflation. And it's also our own population growth that we have to keep up with, let alone whatever our desired rate of service might be in creating more opportunity for our people. We're in business to access a more diverse source of revenue. And I think the most important thing that we're trying to do here is find those opportunities to create value and share in the creation of that value, so that not only are we not depending entirely on the federal and provincial government, but we're also sharing in value creation and building wealth over time, so that we can ultimately have a diverse income stream to create stability, which is the hallmark of rebuilding our communities. Thanks.
Always impresses me how you can be right on time, right to the syllable, my friend. You're going to have to teach me that one day because I am horrible at time management. Thank you for those great remarks to start off this panel. Trevor, I know my nation specifically has a very long-standing partnership with Grieg, and it's really brought a lot of opportunity from some of the visions that our community has had with the rebuilding of our community, Nanwakolas, and the visions of Chief and Council to bring some of those things to reality. Maybe some of your thoughts on some of these projects and partnering and how this works.
Perfect, thank you. Just to start off, I am working and living in the Coast Salish, Kwakwakwak, and the New Chalith territories. I'm pleased to sit here and share what we're trying to do here and what we're working on together. We're kind of paving a new way with some of these partnerships and working on the capacity for tomorrow. We're changing the way we do business. So right now, what we see is a lot with the JVs and the limited partnerships that can offer some employment and a form of revenue share. That works in a lot of different industries, but what we're trying in our industry right now is something that not only do our First Nation partners want, but what we want is where we can enable our partners to become the sole awardee or the sole contract owner of that project. We've had to change up a few ways on how we do business, but today we're working with some of our First Nations partners whose traditional lands that we're working in with a very fluid policy. What can we do to ensure that you have the ability to take on these major projects yourself? And this may be through a nation-owned limited partnership or enabling a member-owned company to step up, or the creation of either one of those two entities. It's understanding the hindrances that can happen internally, such as it could be the capacity of employment, financial, industry knowledge, or just knowing how to get your foot in the door. So what we've done over the course of the past year, as we've sort of started changing up how we're doing things, we've been working, we've signed a couple very nice long-term contracts with some of the nations that we're working with. With one nation, it's a company-owned limited partnership where we have enabled where they wouldn't have been able to be part of this contract prior. So we were able to step in and sort of and help build that capacity to take that on. Same with, we have another contract entrepreneurial business person that the First Nations that is taken on. And it's preparation on how we can make these accessible, how we can build for the future. So we have several major projects that are coming up, and we can work now with the nations over the course of maybe a couple months or even 5 years to help build what needs to happen for them to be able to take on these responsibilities, sort of stepping away from a few employment opportunities or stepping away from a bit of the revenue share, but to actually take on the projects themselves where you become partners. We're true partners on the sites where we're reliant on each other, and that works out great. So it's working out very well. I hope that next year we can come back and sit down and be able to share with you some more success stories and other innovative ways we're doing it to create these new businesses and enabling them to be a big part of the aquaculture industry. I'm a little early, but thank you very much.
There's never a problem being a little early, I'm always told. I never am, but I'm always told that it's never a problem. Small world, Christy Smith, different Smith family, but I understand we have some connections. Great to have you here today. You want to share some of your opening thoughts with us?
Sure. So welcome, everybody. My name is Christy Smith. I'm from the Comox First Nation, specifically from the Hardy family and from the Bear Clan. I've been working as the vice president for Falkirk for probably 5 years in total. And then prior to that with various industry throughout my career. Basically, what I've done for the last 25 years is try to connect Indigenous communities into projects, major projects, some of them oil and gas over in Alberta, to get to a point where we have a solid partnership. And I can tell you we've been moving in a forward trajectory, which is excellent. And today I'm happy to see some of the projects that are coming out across Canada where we see these partnerships and ownership come to light. So very exciting times. Very exciting to be in the position that I am in. We've got several clients that we work with, and the way we operate is our clients are provided with support, especially with training to be able to have a safe communication with the Indigenous communities and not come in and like before. And I mean, history has many community or many projects coming in kind of saying, here it is, this is all you get, see you later, bye. Throw you a few jobs and then never hire anyone. So we really work with our proponents, and we develop a strategy, and we help develop the relationship. And successfully, we've seen full partnerships come to light in the last few years, specifically in the mining industry. So whether that be, and this is of choice, complete partnership and basically running over 50% of a project, to being shareholders, innovative ways to not only do the typical, as Trevor was saying, like, here's a job, here's some training, and here's a bit of cash, or a JV perspective where you're only getting, a certain percentage, and really the proponents paying that percentage on top of the, at the other end. So we really want to see some of that collaboration and that innovation, and I think we're starting to look outside the box. Happy to see the announcement in January with the McMac and their acquisition. But yeah, overall, I think we're heading in the right direction. I think every day I'm looking around for another innovative solution that someone else in this field is doing, or somebody thinks of a way to get people involved. I think Trevor did mention, capacity tends to be a bit of a barrier, but I think there's ways to get through that. So I'm happy today to be talking about this super important subject, and I think we can collaboratively talk about, the path forward today, which is exciting. Thanks. I'm really too.
Thank you so much. We're saving you some time that I'm not going to eat right now, Charlene. Chief Gale, glad to have you here. I've been talking with people like JP Gladue just about how important it is to get equity in some of these major projects. And I know both from your position as chief of your nation, but also your role with the FNM. You know the organization that you're. Yes, yeah. I should just not use acronyms anymore. I'm starting to get a little tongue-tied after 2 days of this. But Charlene, please share some of your thoughts and perspective to start the discussion off.
Well, good morning. I just got to say, wow, what a great conference. And I can see by just the presentation from the other panelists today that we're going to have a really good conversation. So really looking forward to this. And, so I don't know if most of you know, I'm Chief Sharleen Gale. I'm from the Fort Nelson First Nation, and I'm in Treaty 8 territory, which is located northeast BC. And I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition. The work that we do as a nation and with the First Nation Major Projects Coalition has really helped us stay focused as a nation and has given us the ability to make informed business decisions. At our core, we're both trying to achieve the same things for our members. We want to provide economic opportunities for our communities while protecting our lands and honoring our future generations. And we've both seen a need for First Nation leadership to really take the lead on this. And so what I want to focus with you on the short time that I have is the work that we're doing in our nation and that I'm doing with my council and the board of directors of Daytai on our 2-day Ka geothermal project. This is a really exciting time for our people. It's 100% Indigenous led and owned by our nation, and it will contribute to the net zero future that we're all trying to contribute to. So with that, I'd also like to touch a little bit on the work that I do with the First Nation Major Projects Coalition. Our community is working with them and their members to overcome barriers and to find solutions to ensuring Indigenous nations have equity partnerships that are happening in their territories, whether that's one nation that wants to be involved or a group of nations that are surrounded by the project that want to rally and come together to find a solution to be involved in a major way. I think these are critical to advancing reconciliation, including economic reconciliation, and they're critical to addressing the social economic gaps that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in Canada. As other governments, First Nation governments need multiple and stable sources of funding to deliver the programs and services that we have for our members. And we know that the federal funding that we do get does not even meet the needs of our community. And there's just so much that Indigenous people do for their members, especially when it comes to our elders and our youth. We're always looking at new ways to find programming and supports for them. So having equity in major projects can provide a very important source of revenue for many First Nation communities. And we're witnessing a huge rise in ESG, the environment, social, and governance investing, which is changing where capital is currently being deployed. First Nation communities should be a key part of the ESG standards and practices in BC and Canada. That is a need that we have our input into those discussions. And it's a significant opportunity for First Nations to leverage large scale and impact aligned capital to advance our community priorities. Our nation just finished our 5-year Reaching for Vision plan. And so we're working on completing and finalizing our land stewardship plan. And this is all things that we do with our members. So it's important to have those kind of things in place before you get involved in major projects. Equity partnerships in major projects where First Nations is good, where ESG practices can align with our values. And I think it supports visibility for ESG rating agencies. It's a need that you put that Indigenous into ESG. And I think this is a really great time to do it. The pandemic situation has just stressed many of our communities, our societies, and economies across the world. And partnering with First Nation through equity deals on major projects can create a significant economic growth and support COVID-19 recovery in BC and across Canada and into the States if we really start collaborating with each other, especially when it comes to the grid and electrification. So through collaboration with industry, local municipalities, provincial, federal government, and other First Nation governments, I really do believe if we put our minds together, we can create real change that impacts from the ground up, from First Nation communities into municipalities, into the provincial and federal regime, and then across this country. And I just have to acknowledge that there is so much great work that is being done by our people across this country. And it makes me very hopeful for our children. Our people have been through so much. We're overcoming those challenges. We're, strong, we're educated. And I just think through collaboration, the more that we work on, communication, collaboration, and inclusion, the further we're going to get for all of us and to make a better environment for future generations. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Gale. Tremendous start off for this panel in this important and growing issue that I don't think people really know enough about yet. So I'm really pleased that you guys are sharing your knowledge. We got some great questions coming in from the audience. Maybe I'll ask you, John. What are your recommendations on approaching partnerships and equity ownerships in renewable energy projects that some Indigenous communities or really any rural communities may not be familiar with?
So this is right up our alley, and I think Huu-ay-aht is working with a partner in the Barclay Group and on a renewable energy run-of-the-river project. But I think what I'll do is I'll reference some work that we did with an LNG company not too long ago, because the question is not being familiar with a particular technology or aspect of the economy, and it's quite important that you start with the relationship building with the leaders and staff within a nation and the economic development officers or company board folks to start to build an understanding of what that aspect of the economy looks like, what it takes in order to be successful in that, and what kind of value proposition is there to the nation, but also for the nation. And that's a longer process than you might think. This is something that you need to think of when you're putting together the idea of floating the entire project to a First Nation. You have to start with that relationship building aspect as well and build that into your timelines, because building trust and building understanding, not only with the leaders of a government and the leaders of a nation, but also the population as a whole, is really the key to success. And that's something that we were able to do with Steelhead LNG back in the day. We had a 2-year relationship with them before we even put the project up to a vote to move forward and try to move it forward. We were successful in doing that, and a smaller version of that can be put forward depending on the scale and scope of whatever project you're putting forward. And as ever, it starts with relationships, but it bridges out into education and true communication. Thanks.
Well, that's a great answer. It's always nice to have access to people like yourselves as we go down some of these roads that some of our brothers and sisters have gone down. So this is some tremendous opportunities to really soak in some information. Chief Gale, with some of the large projects, First Nations economic development entities form special purpose vehicles as a means to facilitate an equity stake in large projects. Such SPVs can be challenging for traditional leaders as they often carry limitations to recourse provisions. Can you please speak to your experiences if you've successfully been using any of this SPV?
It's the first time I've ever heard of SPV, but I can speak to some of like what they're asking here. And I think it just goes back to when you're going to be working with First Nation communities. Christy hit it right on the button there when she said, don't come with your preconceived plans, develop those plans with the nations. I think through reconciliation, it's important that, you align equity deals with First Nations that meet their values, that meet their values to their land and the principles of how they want to protect that land. Some of the other, I guess, special vehicles that I use is, the UNDRIP framework, ensuring that First Nations have their rights protected while benefiting from economic opportunities and stewarding their lands and resources. I think that's an important part of the piece. First Nations have always tried to find that balance between, economic prosperity and environmental stewardship. And there's also the TRC calls to action, importance of the private sector and industry taking tangible steps to advance this reconciliation. A lot of the times we see people come to the table and there's really good dialogue and conversation and commitment, but a lot of the time there isn't follow-up. And I think that people just need to look at these kind of issues with a different lens. And one of the things that I really honor and protect in our territory is the treaty. I think the treaty is very important. And, it's a peace and sharing treaty. It opened up our territory so that families and newcomers could come live on our lands and, raise their families and benefit. And so over the past 100 years, I've seen a lot of that promises not be honored. And, you see different things coming out of this with specific claims and whatnot. So I think it's important as Canadians to realize that you're treaty too. and that you have an obligation to the treaty, and that when you're operating in a territory, it should be meaningful, and you should be reaching out to the First Nations to see if they want to be involved. Some nations support a project, but they may not want equity. So the other thing is the importance of FIP. Free, prior, and informed consent. Entering into equity partnerships can activate that, but it is important. It's a part of the process. Equity partnerships can facilitate obtaining consent to develop the major project. You just have to meet with the chief and council. You have to meet with the community, be transparent as much as you can, share the data. I'm pleased to see that BC and Canada have adopted UNDRIP and, have enact some legislation to start having that conversation with Canadians. And Indigenous access to capital and equity in major projects must be key in implementing UNDRIP in BC and in Canada. And in order for First Nations to be involved in major projects, we need to have access to capital. Through the past, many hundreds of years, we've been stripped of our wealth. And so we don't have the means to be meaningfully involved in, getting equity. So, there's some challenges here that we have to overcome as we move into the future, and we have to do this together.
No, that's a great point. It's interesting seeing the evolution of the discussions with industry when it comes to those issues. I remember speaking with a forest company a couple of years ago about trying to get into an equity partnership. And they're sort of like, okay, well, we're in for that. Whatever you invest, you should be able to be there. And I was sort of like, well, don't make me devalue your company so I can afford to invest in it and get a meaningful partnership and share. And I see that tone is really starting to leave most industries. I think most industries are starting to, I hate it, but get it. The writing's on the wall and they're understanding that. And I think that we see these positive stories going forward that's opening up other industries' eyes, which leads into the next question that I have here. Sorry, they're moving on me, but I'm still going to ask it right now because it's in my head. Can you comment on the recent progress between the Mi'kmaq and DFO in reaching an agreement? While I thought this would have been a positive step towards Indigenous-owned resource development, there seems to be a lot of contention amongst the non-Indigenous counterparts. This is really a convoluted story. I remember it was during BC IROC last year when they were literally ramming the Mi'kmaq fishermen when they were trying to use their treaty to find, what did they call it, an adequate means to an income, a moderate income. So it's not even like they were trying to take everything. They were just trying to keep a livelihood like everybody else was. And they were being physically threatened, abused, fires were being made. So maybe John and Christy, I'll go to John first. We saw the Clearwater Group come in and make the huge acquisition. Maybe you can comment a little further on that.
I think that's a two-part question. I think the value that's being created by the Clearwater acquisition is demonstrable, that when you create a business entity and a business venture that includes First Nations, Indigenous people embedded within that endeavor, that opens up so much potential for value creation. And I think some of the friction that's been created, especially with other fishermen, is the worry that it isn't necessarily the creation of new value, but the taking away of pre-existing and diminishing value. And I'm not certain that that's the case, but there needs to be a communication and there needs to be an assertion of the understanding that when First Nations and Indigenous communities get involved in the economy directly, potential opens up and wealth creation potential increases significantly to the point where there's more than enough room for not only Indigenous people to benefit from that and Indigenous ventures, Indigenous institutions and organizations, but also their partners. That when you create that level of social license and you create that level of understanding in the economy and in the politics, that opens up a lot of potential for the creation of value. And that's really what the global economy is about. It rewards the creation of value. And we need to share in that. But it can still grow. It's not a zero-sum game.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, John. Christy, any thoughts on that question?
I think more and more we see Indigenous businesses or communities come forward to be partners in the economy. We're going to have this, I don't want to say it's almost, I don't want to say it's like racist, but it continues with the oppression, right? We're coming out of an oppressed era, and we're building quickly. And the most important thing I think here is that sorry, my computer is making a million sounds. I don't know how to turn it off. I think the most important thing here is that you have a beautiful example of an agreement and opportunity, and you see the people that are fearing and not wanting to have something outside the norm, or worried that, special rights are going to be applied, which they should, and then they lose out. So, I follow completely with what John was saying. It's a fear of losing value. So I really, I think it's a great story, and I want to continue to watch it progress. And I'm interested, very interested in the non-Indigenous perspective, because we're going to have more projects like this. And there's going to be opposition, and the communities and businesses owned by Indigenous people across the country have to be prepared to deal with a little bit extra, unfortunately. But be ready, because we're coming. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So true. We're not going anywhere, and I don't think we expect anyone else to go anywhere. So we just got to figure it out. I don't want to oversimplify it, but you kind of learn by doing. Trevor, I got another question from, I believe it's my friend Richard Truman at Geoscience BC. I would love to hear the panel's thoughts on early stage engagement leading to future partnerships. I know that's something that Grieg takes very seriously. An example, a mineral exploration company won't necessarily build a mine, but do have an opportunity to build that relationship for the forward thinking, for the future development. How is the best way to do this? And by association, how can different research organizations, whether it be like Geoscience BC or maybe others in the marine field, work better with First Nations?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the first starting points to that is most companies have an SOP or their manual on how to work. Leave that aside. This is got to be a First Nations-led relationship. We make ourselves available. I like to use the term a humble student when it comes to anything that we're doing with any of our First Nations partners. The need, whether it's economic, whether it is as we always keep bringing up, the capacity for employment or whatever the case might be, differs. And the only way you understand and build the relationships is through respect and learning. And that's the avenue we come at. And I think that's your best step, no matter what the resource, no matter what it is, and understanding the fact that we're there as a partnership. If you're trying to build a partnership that's equitable and you're both trying to move forward, then it should be an easy way to find ways to carry each other's up, to lift each other up to success.
That's great stuff. I think we're hearing some common denominators that, like you just said, Trevor, are really usable no matter what the resource interaction or partnership that you're looking to develop goes. And that starts with really respectful communication to just start the dialogue off. And it's tremendous to see so many companies learning that lesson and not learning it the hard way. While there is still some dust ups and some scrapes, I know generally within my nation's collective territories, we're finding that respectful outreach before somebody's applying for a tenure and all those other things that go along with this. What I'd like to do now is give you each, 45 seconds with some final thoughts, something that you want to leave our audience with. And so I'll start with Christy.
Unmute myself. Thank you. This has been great. One comment, and it resonated with me when Chief Sharleen was speaking, is about capital. The other thing is that time is a colonial construct. We have processes that are put into place in forestry and industry, and they don't always work for the communities. Most of the time they don't work. So that needs to be understood. And going back to that last question that Trevor answered, I really feel like understanding time and understanding who you're speaking to and who the community is and the values, and make sure the ethics are associated with your project as well as the community. So there's a lot of things. We need way more hours to talk about this. But just that we're working in very much a process-oriented era still, without the application of Indigenous constructs. So, thanks.
That's great. John?
I think for my final comment, I think, is just to really underline the value of a desktop study. So if you're not a First Nation and you're here to think about and contemplate working with First Nations communities and ventures, then it's really important to understand what your neighbors are trying to do, what these First Nations are trying to achieve in doing the things that they do. And so there's a lot of power in looking up the strategic plans, looking up the social media posts and the communications that these First Nations might put out to speak to their own citizens. And that will point at the types of things that are interesting them and the frameworks and the lenses by which they look at the world. You can inform yourself as to what that looks like. And it's always to a partnership's benefit if people are thinking about what the interests of the people who are sitting at the table with them are, so that you can seek those common interests and really find a way to create that value. And I think there are companies that can do that by forging relationships in partnerships and doing a thing. But then, like Geoscience BC, you can forge a relationship to help verify the claims of other prospective partners. And so that's something that, if you can find your niche in reconciliation, in economic reconciliation, sometimes it's providing a service to a First Nation so that they can build trust with a mineral company by doing that kind of work. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for the creation of value and jobs in this economy just by working together well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, John. Trevor, parting thoughts?
Yes. I just wanted to just say again that for a lot of companies out there like us, and there's a lot of different ones out there that are looking to build the relationships and looking at different ways, there is an entrepreneurial spirit and there is business knowledge that in a lot of ways is untapped and unutilized. And all it takes is acknowledgement, respect, and an investment of even just time. And you can build some great relationships and create some fantastic opportunities for lots of people. So you got to keep your mind open, learn, and just do ethical and do what's right. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Final word of the whole conference, well, until Minister Rankin comes on this afternoon, but Charlene, Chief Gale.
Well, I just think it's important for everyone to know that any kind of resource project in Canada going forward is going to require Indigenous involvement and social license, with a few exceptions. But in my opinion, there is a huge opportunity for industry and proponents to not only address reconciliation, but to ensure Indigenous rights are respected and benefits are finally at the forefront of any new development. And we're already seeing what that can look like. our nation is working on a forestry initiative with Peak Renewables. And, we've taken over the CAN for 10 years in our territory. We're working on this geothermal project, which is 100% owned by the Fort Nelson First Nation. And we have seen that Indigenous partnerships lead to better environmental stewardship and alignment with traditional cultural values. Our people are on the land. They continue to be on the land to fish, hunt, provide substance, and gather medicines. And that is of importance of us. And that's what we incorporate into these projects. It's not prosperity over environment. We really do strike that balance in between and work hard to ensure we do that. But these projects are also going to lead to Fort Nelson First Nation and Daytai having their own source revenue, which, is a great investment for our community. And when I talked about our 5-year Reaching for a Vision strategic plan, that's really going to help our community reach our priorities. It's going to lead to an employment. We're going to have Indigenous communities around us. We're going to have the municipality benefiting from job opportunities during the construction and the operation phase. We're going to have more opportunities for our youth and our members, which just excites me because a lot of the time we get pushed into this seasonal work, which isn't very meaningful at the end of the project. We need projects that are owned by Indigenous communities where people are getting benefits. They're working towards their retirement plans. They have vacation. They have time with their family, and they're putting more than just bread and butter on the table. It leads to greater self-determination, and because of our economic participation, it affirms our Indigenous rights. And I think that is the way into the future. There's many reasons why we're working towards this and we're being engaged in major projects. And we know that this kind of work just does not happen on its own. It takes a lot of capital to explore and implement. And, as I mentioned before, nations have historically had many barriers in participating in resource development due to a lack of capital. And like I said it before, we were stripped of our wealth. And this has made it hard for us now to provide any equity that we need to be partners and to reduce our risk to our nations. And so therefore, the cost of borrowing money could be more challenging. It's borrowed at a higher interest rate. So it is my belief that, it is time for the province in Canada to implement an Indigenous loan guarantee program. And there's models out there right now that are happening in Alberta.
Okay, we've had a technical glitch there, and I'm being told that we've lost Chief Gale's feed. Tremendous panel. I really appreciate you guys giving your time and your energy and your thoughts into this. John, we're seeing each other too much virtually. Eventually we got to find a playground so our kids can play and we can just have a bit of a bullshit and catch up a little bit. Look forward to seeing you all soon. I want to thank you for joining us for today's final panel session. Please make your way again to the agenda tab to select the next session, our final keynote of the week with the Honorable Murray Rankin, Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.